The air inside the Naval Operations Center felt cold enough to bite, the kind of chill that clung to skin and warned of oncoming trouble. Harsh fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flickering in a rhythm that echoed Megan Hart's steady breathing. She stood among seasoned officers like a quiet shadow, uniform flawless, expression unreadable. To them, she was simply a young lieutenant commander who blended into the room. But her stillness carried weight, like a cold wire waiting to snap. Keyboard clicks and radio static merged into a humming tension that pressed against her ears. The place smelled of burnt coffee, electrical heat, and nerves. Her eyes scanned the screens with surgical precision, absorbing everything without appearing to notice anything. She moved with the kind of discipline earned through secrets few humans ever carried. And today, she needed that mask more than ever. The steel door slammed open so hard that the sound cracked through the room like gunfire. Admiral Richardson strode in with the confidence of a man who believed rank made him untouchable. His polished shoes clicked sharply, each step dripping authority and disdain. His gaze swept the room, then landed on her like a spotlight meant to expose. For a split second, his lip curled, as though her presence contaminated the space. "You," he barked, voice slicing the air. "Out. Now." Conversations died instantly, replaced by a silence so thick she could feel it against her skin. Her pulse didn't waver, but the room flinched around her. She stepped back, slow and controlled, as if choreographing her own humiliation, and no one dared to breathe. Around her, officers stiffened but kept their eyes glued to the floor, pretending not to witness the public dismissal. One man shifted his weight as if he might defend her, then stopped, jaw tightening with silent cowardice. A woman nearby swallowed hard, hands trembling around her tablet, yet still said nothing. The fear of crossing the Admiral outweighed the instinct for fairness. Megan absorbed each reaction, like a scientist collecting data. Their silence burned hotter than the Admiral's words. The familiar sting of invisibility pressed against her chest, not from shame, but from the necessity of staying small. She walked with practiced humility, steps measured, shoulders relaxed. Every inch of her performance whispered obedience. And every inch of her eyes whispered something far more dangerous. Though her face stayed stone still, fury pulsed beneath her skin like a restrained storm. Her jaw tightened for half a heartbeat before she forced it loose again. The fluorescent lights caught the faint shimmer in her irises, the glint of someone who had endured far worse than an arrogant superior. She wasn't here to win approval, she was here to remain unseen. Each breath she exhaled was smooth, controlled, betraying nothing of the fire folding inward. The air tasted of cold metal, and she let that metallic bitterness ground her. Her boots sounded soft against the floor as she moved toward the exit, a deliberate contrast to Richardson's heavy stride. She kept her shoulders even, not granting him the satisfaction of haste. Anger lived in her. Yes, but discipline lived deeper, and discipline always won. The hallway outside was dimmer, quieter, humming with the low vibration of distant machinery. She let the door close behind her with a muted thud, the sound strangely final. For a moment, she allowed her mask to crack just enough for a sharp breath to escape. Her fingers twitched at her side, the only sign of the adrenaline she forced into submission. Then her phone vibrated, one short buzz, impossibly coded, unmistakably urgent. She pulled it from her pocket, the screen glowing an encrypted message only a ghost operative would understand. Her eyes narrowed as she read the text. Phase 2 compromised. Proceed to extraction point Alpha immediately. The hallway suddenly felt colder, heavier, alive with threat. Something was unraveling, and she was the only one who knew it had already begun. Years earlier, the ocean wind had cut across Megan's face. She stood on the deck of a covert training vessel, salt stinging her lips, night pressing in like a living creature. She had been one of only 3 women allowed to attempt the grueling SEAL-Link pipeline, a path lined with broken bodies and shattered pride. Her lungs had burned from cold Pacific water, but she kept moving, each stroke powered by something deeper than ambition. Instructors watched her with a mixture of disbelief and calculation, unsure whether she was a miracle or a mistake. The sound of helicopter rotors often drowned out her thoughts, forcing her to find stillness in chaos. Metal, sweat, and seaweed clung to her uniform, marking her transformation from invisible recruit to undeniable operative. She pushed past limits until they stopped existing. Her reputation spread quietly, the woman who never quit. Her ascent wasn't just earned, it was carved from pain. And every scar told a story she refused to speak aloud. But her greatest wound came later, under a burning Yemeni sun where the air smelled of sand, diesel, and blood. Her team had moved through crumbling alleyways, shadows stretching long from the rising heat. She remembered the sudden ambush, the echo of gunfire bouncing off stone, dust choking her lungs. She'd called for backup, voice raw, only to hear silence on the comms, then footsteps retreating. Her teammates abandoning her, leaving her bleeding behind a shattered wall. She dragged herself toward cover, hands trembling as tears mixed with grit, her trust dying there in the dirt. Rescue came hours later, but something inside her never rose again. Since that day, people became threats, promises became weapons, and loyalty became a luxury she could no longer afford. The lesson branded itself deep. Trust no one. Survive alone. Hydra found her exactly because of that brutal clarity. In dim rooms filled with encrypted screens and recycled air, their recruiters watched her move like a ghost, slipping unnoticed through environments others stumbled in. Her power wasn't brute force, it was erasure, the uncanny ability to disappear in plain sight. She navigated classified facilities as though she were part of the architecture, just another fixture no one questioned. Her breathing slowed when danger spiked, her instincts sharpened where others panicked. She became the weapon Hydra valued most, one no enemy or ally ever saw coming. They didn't train her, they refined her. Their operatives called her the shadow in the doorway, the presence felt but never confirmed. To Hydra, she wasn't an asset, she was the answer to missions that demanded ghosts over soldiers. And she played that role with precise, terrifying grace. Her life outside the mission dissolved piece by piece, like pages torn from a book no one would ever read. Relationships wilted under the weight of lies she couldn't explain and absences she couldn't justify. Birthdays passed unacknowledged, names faded, old photos gathered dust in drawers she rarely opened. She let identities slip through her fingers, sister, friend, lover, until only the operative remained. The taste of cold rations replaced home-cooked meals. Fluorescent lights replaced sunlight. Coded messages replaced human connection. She traded recognition for anonymity, applause for silence, companionship for operational necessity. Her world shrank to shadows and encrypted files, and yet, somewhere in the corners of her chest, something still ached for what she'd buried. Sacrifice became her language, and loneliness, her constant shadow. Now, in the present, the pieces of her investigation spread across her encrypted tablet like landmines waiting to detonate. Naval procurement records, falsified bids, offshore accounts, each one pointing toward corruption worth billions. The kind of corruption that didn't just destroy careers, it toppled institutions. Her fingers hovered over the screen, the faint hum of servers filling the air like distant thunder. She felt watched, though the room was empty, a prickle crawling up her spine. Someone inside JSOC had noticed the pattern she was uncovering, someone powerful, someone close. And as she exhaled slowly, the realization hit her with chilling certainty. Whoever betrayed her in Yemen might not have been her last betrayer. The next move wouldn't just decide her mission, it would decide whether she lived long enough to expose the truth. Megan moved through the dockside warehouse with the silent precision of a phantom, every step calculated, every breath controlled, as she located the encrypted evidence hidden inside a rusted metal crate. The dim blue light from her tactical tablet illuminated the data that confirmed Admiral Richardson's involvement in the corruption scheme, but the deeper she read, the clearer the truth became. Richardson was no mastermind, only a manipulated pawn. The files pointed to someone far higher, far more protected, someone who had erased their digital fingerprints with expert precision. She scanned the codes again, confirming that billions in naval contracts had been redirected through shell companies controlled by an unknown entity inside the Pentagon. A faint drip of water echoed across the cavernous warehouse, and Megan's instincts sharpened instantly. Her hand drifted toward her sidearm, but she didn't draw it yet. She knew she wasn't alone, for hostile operatives stepped out from the shadows, moving with synchronized confidence that told her they were trained professionals, not street-level mercenaries. Megan's weapon rose in an instant, but she didn't fire blindly. Instead, she used the crates, chains, and broken machinery around her as extensions of her own body. She dodged the first assailant's strike and slammed him into a steel beam, dislocating his shoulder with a precise twist. The second rushed her with a pipe, and she used his momentum to flip him over a stack of pallets. The third attempted a flanking maneuver, but she swept his legs and disabled him with 2 precise blows to the throat and sternum. The air filled with the metallic clang of footsteps, the grunt of impact, and her steady, controlled breathing. Megan's training took over, each move executed with SEAL-grade efficiency and absolute calm. But the fourth attacker was faster, more skilled, and had waited for the perfect moment to strike from behind a column where Megan's line of sight had been weakest. He lunged with a tactical knife, and despite Megan's rapid spin to deflect the blow, the blade slid deep into her abdomen with brutal force. Pain erupted through her core, hot and immediate, and her vision pulsed as she fought to stay upright. She grabbed the attacker's wrist, drove her knee into his ribs, and twisted the blade free before shoving it into his carotid artery with flawless precision. The man collapsed instantly, but Megan staggered, hand pressing her wound as blood seeped through her fingers. She forced herself to breathe through the agony, refusing to collapse. She scanned her surroundings through blurring vision, confirming all four hostiles were down. Her legs gave out and she sank to the cold concrete floor, blood pooling beneath her as the warehouse lights flickered overhead. Megan tasted iron and adrenaline as she fumbled for her emergency beacon, knowing she had only minutes before hypovolemic shock set in. Her fingers trembled, but she activated the beacon with a practiced motion, sending a coded distress signal directly to HYDRA's secure channel. Her breathing grew shallow, each inhale a battle she was rapidly losing. The evidence drive slipped from her grasp and clattered softly beside her. She tried to focus on the ceiling, but the shadows began to swim. A cold numbness spread across her limbs as consciousness faded in and out like a weakening radio signal. She knew rescue might come, but it might not arrive in time. As her vision darkened, a shape moved in the distance, blurred but unmistakably human, walking with deliberate steps toward her fallen body. Megan blinked hard, trying to force her eyes to focus past the dizziness and the blood loss. The figure came closer, illuminated by the faint glow of a broken overhead lamp, and she saw the outline of a U.S. Navy uniform, crisp and official. Her heartbeat slowed, confusion mixing with fear as she struggled to understand whether this was rescue or something far more dangerous. The boot stopped just inches from her, but she could no longer lift her head to see the face. Her blood-soaked fingers twitched helplessly at her side. The last thing she saw before her vision collapsed into darkness was the glint of an officer's insignia on the uniformed stranger's chest. Megan surfaced from unconsciousness slowly, as if swimming upward through layers of thick, suffocating fog, until the sterile scent of antiseptic hit her senses. Soft hospital lights glowed overhead, monitors beat in steady rhythm beside her, and a thin tube ran into her arm, feeding saline into her bloodstream. She blinked hard and scanned her surroundings, instantly noting the lack of military signage. This was a civilian facility. Her file, she realized, had been rewritten. Hydra must have buried her identity under layers of false medical records to keep her off the radar. The chart at her bedside listed her as Margaret Hale, a fabricated name she'd used once in Syria. It was a good cover too good for coincidence. Someone from her world had intervened to hide her, but who had brought her here? A young nurse entered with a calmness that didn't match the tension humming beneath the surface. Sarah, mid-20s, with steady hands and soft brown eyes, moved with practiced ease as she adjusted Megan's monitors and checked her vitals. She didn't ask how Megan had received a military-grade knife wound, didn't press for details the way most civilians would. Her silence was intentional, professional, and strangely protective. Megan watched her with trained suspicion, searching her face for ulterior motives, but found only quiet concentration. Sarah's touch was gentle, almost too careful, as if she knew exactly how much pain Megan was hiding. The nurse offered a small smile, one that softened the cold edges of the room. Megan's instincts wavered, caught between vigilance and curiosity. For the first time in years, Megan felt something foreign creeping into her chest. Vulnerability, unwelcome yet undeniable. Being bedridden, unarmed, and tethered to machines was a nightmare for someone shaped by Black Ops shadows and betrayal. Yet Sarah's steady presence, her patience, her wordless understanding, chipped away at Megan's walls more effectively than any interrogation code. The nurse spoke softly about mundane things: weather, coffee, the annoying flicker of a hallway light, and Megan found herself listening. She hated how much she relied on Sarah's presence to anchor her as painkillers blurred the edges of reality. But this woman, a civilian on the surface, created an atmosphere Megan hadn't felt in years. Safety without conditions. Later, as Sarah adjusted Megan's bandages, she broke her usual silence and shared something unexpected. She mentioned she was a veteran, that she had served as an army medic in Iraq in 2019. She said it casually, almost like a confession. Revealing a history that instantly reframed her calm composure and her instinctive understanding of wounds like Megan's. The room seemed to shift as their worlds aligned for a moment, to soldiers carrying invisible scars beneath their skin. Megan studied Sarah's face, seeing traces of things she recognized: trauma, resilience, and a quiet strength forged in battlefield triage tents. The connection loosened something deep inside Megan, a truth she rarely acknowledged: she didn't always have to be alone. As night deepened, Sarah leaned close while pretending to adjust Megan's for pump, her voice dropping to a whisper barely audible over the monitor's steady beat. Her eyes flicked toward the hallway, then back to Megan with sharp, urgent clarity. "I know you're not who your chart says you are," she murmured, each word deliberate and unshakably sure. Megan's pulse spiked on the monitor, but Sarah tightened her grip on her wrist, steadying her. "And they're coming for you tonight." Megan's breath caught, adrenaline surging through her weakened body as Sarah stepped back, face composed but eyes burning with warning. The room suddenly felt smaller, darker, and far more dangerous. Admiral Richardson stormed through the naval transport bay with the fury of a man who believed the world owed him obedience, his boots striking the ground with sharp, echoing authority. His aides struggled to keep pace as he barked into his phone, demanding to know why hospital resources were being wasted on an insubordinate lieutenant commander who had no business surviving a mission she had clearly botched. Rage boiled under his skin, fueled not only by Megan's supposed incompetence, but by the humiliation he felt after she forced him to remove her from the briefing room earlier. He convinced himself she was a liability, too impulsive, too confident, too young to challenge protocol. By the time he reached the transport vehicle, his decision was set in stone. Megan Hart would be removed from his command structure permanently, no warnings, no appeals. Her career would end tonight, and he felt justified in delivering that final blow. Inside the hospital, unaware of Richardson's approach, Sarah sat beside Megan's bed with tense focus as she monitored the emergency frequencies crackling through her small encrypted device. The static-filled chatter wasn't normal medical traffic, it was organized, coded, and absolutely military. Multiple inbound signatures were converging on the hospital from 3 different directions, moving too quickly and too quietly to be standard medevac teams or security forces. Sarah had used her medic training and post-service equipment to intercept such signals before, but never anything this coordinated. Her heart pounded as she decoded phrases like asset retrieval, containment, and execute without delay. She glanced at Megan, who was still weak but awake enough to sense the shift in the air. Without speaking, Sarah tightened the restraints on the wound dressings, her jaw firm with determination and fear. Meanwhile, Richardson entered his office to grab documents before leaving for the hospital, ready to deliver the reprimand that would end Megan's naval future. But the moment he stepped inside, he sensed something was wrong. A single classified folder lay open on his desk, one he had never seen before, one stamped with clearance levels far above his pay grade. His irritation morphed into confusion as he flipped through the contents, expecting routine disciplinary forms. Instead, he found photographs of Megan in combat zones he had no authorization even to know existed. Images of her leading covert rescue operations in Yemen, dismantling insurgent cells in Libya, and extracting hostage VIPs under conditions so classified that even the Admiral of Naval Operations had never been briefed. The further he read, the more a cold, unwelcome truth clawed at him. Megan Hart was not who he thought she was. He dropped into his chair, breath shallow, as the implications unraveled in his mind. If Megan had been placed near him under false rank and identity, it meant she was part of something larger than his command, something that outranked him in both authority and secrecy. He frantically searched the folder for a chain of authorization, for a reason why someone like her had been allowed to stand in his briefing room disguised as a mere lieutenant commander. Instead, he found only mission codes he didn't recognize, agencies with no known names, and redacted pages blacked out so thoroughly they looked burned. Sweat formed at his temples. Someone had put this folder on his desk intentionally. Someone wanted him to understand he was being played with not by Megan, but by the system he thought he controlled. He slammed his palm on the desk and stood abruptly, fear replacing anger as he headed for the hospital. As he stepped into the hallway, the lights overhead flickered twice in a perfectly timed pattern. Not a coincidence, not a malfunction, a signal. A protocol used only by one entity within JSOC, one he had hoped never to encounter in his entire career. Richardson froze, his stomach turning to ice as the significance washed over him. Hydra, the covert task force rumored to operate in the deepest shadows, answering to no one in the conventional chain of command. The flicker protocol meant they were already inside the operational zone. The hospital was compromised, not by chaos, but by precision. And Megan Hart, who he had intended to reprimand, was at the center of an operation he suddenly realized he should have never interfered with. The hospital corridor fell into an unnatural stillness, as if the entire building exhaled and then forgot how to breathe again. Nurses froze mid-step, monitors hummed unevenly, and even the fluorescent lights seemed to dim under the weight of an unseen command. One by one, security personnel looked down at their radios as a terse, encrypted directive crackled through. Stand down immediately. No signature, no origin. No one dared question it. Guards lowered their weapons with visible confusion, exchanging glances that asked the same silent question: who had the authority to override local command? The air felt tight, charged, as though something immense was gathering outside their perception. Conversations died out, footsteps stopped. The silence wasn't empty, it was waiting. Admiral Richardson strode into the building moments later, arrogance guiding each step like an invisible hand pushing him forward. He smirked as he noted the tense faces around him, interpreting their fear as nothing more than an exaggerated response to an officer's arrival. In his mind, this was precisely the kind of overreaction that plagued modern military structures. Too many protocols, too many alarms, too many excuses. He waved off a nurse who tried to inform him of restricted access, muttering about incompetence and bureaucratic panic. His ego swelled with the belief that he was the highest-ranking figure in the area, the one in control. To him, the silence was nothing more than a prelude to his own authority filling the space. He failed to notice how the walls themselves seemed to be holding their breath. Then the air changed literally. A shift in atmospheric pressure rippled down the hallway like a silent shockwave, subtle enough to ignore yet powerful enough to trigger something primal in everyone's instincts. Tapers fluttered on desks, a rolling car trembled. The temperature dipped as though a storm front had rushed into the building. Before Richardson could process it, the front entrance door slammed open with explosive force, hitting the walls so hard the windows vibrated. A blast of cold night air swept inside, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of steel, sweat, and operational precision. Every head snapped toward the entrance. No one breathed. The storm had arrived. 97 operators poured into the corridor with the synchronicity of a single organism. DevGru, MARSOC, ghost units with no insignia, their uniforms stripped of identification, their weapons held with the easy confidence of those who had fired them in war zones unacknowledged by any official record. Their boots hit the floor in perfect rhythm, controlled, calm, terrifying. Some wore full tactical gear, others were in lightweight infiltration suits. All of them radiated the same cold focus reserved for missions of absolute necessity. Hospital staff pressed against the walls, stunned into petrified silence. These were elite warriors trained to take down fortified compounds, not walk hospital hallways. Yet here they were, moving with purpose, forming a corridor of steel and muscle that transformed the sterile space into a battleground waiting for orders. At the center of the formation stepped Commander Gray, his presence slicing through the tension like a drawn blade. His expression was unreadable, his gaze locked directly on Admiral Richardson with the precision of a laser sight. When he spoke, his voice was low, resonant, and carried the weight of an authority far beyond traditional rank. "Stand down, Admiral," he said, each word honed to lethal sharpness. "Hydra Command authority is now in effect." The blood drained from Richardson's face, the reality slamming into him harder than any physical blow. He wasn't in control, he wasn't even close. The shadows had stepped into the light, and they were here for Megan Hart. Admiral Richardson froze as the word Hydra echoed through the corridor, his mind grinding to a halt as if someone had yanked the power cable from his thoughts. Confusion twisted across his face for a single second before something far darker settled in recognition. Not from personal experience, but from whispered rumors buried in secure briefings and redacted files. Hydra was not a unit, it was a myth wrapped in classification, a designation spoken only in windowless rooms and never directly acknowledged. It sat above his clearance level, above the Joint Chiefs, above anything he was supposed to know existed. His throat went dry, his breath stuttered. For the first time in his career, Admiral Richardson confronted a truth he couldn't command, dismiss, or outrank, and it terrified him. Inside Megan's hospital room, the transformation was instantaneous and absolute. A Hydra clearance badge, black, metallic, and unmistakably lethal in its authority, was placed on the foot of her bed. The effect was immediate. Operators flooded the room with controlled efficiency, sealing off windows, securing entry points, and deploying portable shielding units that turned the civilian space into a hardened command center. Monitors were overridden, medical staff evacuated, and classified equipment materialized from tactical cases that had no place in a hospital. The atmosphere shifted into something electric and dangerous. Every movement served one purpose: protect the operative on the bed at any cost. Megan's false medical records vanished from her chart as elite technicians replaced them with encrypted systems only Hydra could access. Commander Gray stepped forward, the dim overhead lights reflecting off his expression of cold, unyielding authority. He stopped inches from Richardson, who now seemed smaller beneath the weight of the truth pressing down on him. Gray spoke with a calmness so absolute it felt like a blow. "Deputy Commander Hart outranks every operational command here, including you, sir." The word struck with the force of a hammer. Richardson blinked, his vision blurring for a moment as his world rearranged itself around this new hierarchy. Megan Hart, the woman he had publicly humiliated, dismissed, and prepared to punish, was not his subordinate. She was his superior by a margin so vast it overturned everything he believed about power. The Admiral's legs trembled, nearly giving out beneath him as the implications detonated in his mind. 97 elite operators expanded their formation, sealing off Megan's room with an impenetrable human fortress. No one, no general, no admiral, no politician would be allowed to cross that threshold without Hydra authorization. The corridors outside hummed with tension as more operators stationed themselves at strategic points, ensuring nothing could breach the perimeter. Richardson's breath came shallow and unsteady. His earlier bravado had evaporated, replaced with a raw, unfiltered fear that gnawed at him like an exposed nerve. His authority meant nothing here. His command dissolved under the shadow of Hydra. Then, in the thick silence that followed, movement stirred on the bed. Megan's eyelids fluttered, her breathing steadying as consciousness slipped back into her body with controlled precision. Slowly, deliberately, she opened her eyes. They locked onto Richardson's terrified gaze with a clarity sharper than any blade in the room. Every operator turned in respectful stillness as she pushed herself upright despite her injuries, muscles trembling but resolute. The air tightened as she sat up, her presence radiating a silent dominance that filled the room. And in that moment, Richardson realized the truth. Megan Hart had never been the vulnerable one he was. Admiral Richardson stepped into Megan's room with the hesitant gait of a man approaching his own execution, his voice already fracturing before a single word escaped his mouth. The fortified chamber hummed with encrypted systems and the quiet vigilance of elite operators, yet nothing felt as heavy as the silence between him and the woman sitting upright in the hospital bed. His throat bobbed as he tried to swallow his shame, his eyes refusing to meet hers for more than a second at a time. "Commander Hart, Megan, I didn't know. I didn't understand who you were. I misjudged you. I was." His words stumbled apart like broken glass, sharp and useless. The arrogance he had once worn like armor had crumbled, leaving only regret and fear. He searched her face desperately, hoping for some sign of mercy, but her expression remained unreadable. When Megan finally spoke, her voice cut through the room with the precision of a scalpel, cold, measured, and devastatingly calm. "You weren't supposed to know who I was, sir," she said, her gaze steady and unflinching, "but you didn't need to humiliate me." The simplicity of the statement made it more punishing than any shouted accusation could have been. She didn't raise her voice, didn't lean forward, didn't display even a flicker of anger. Instead, She delivered the truth with the emotional detachment of someone who had been betrayed one too many times. Richardson flinched as if struck. Around them, SEAL operators remained utterly still, forming a silent jury that bore witness to his unraveling. Megan's composure only underscored the power dynamic he had failed to see until it was far too late. Sarah stepped forward from her position near the wall, the soft glow of tactical monitors illuminating her youthful face with a conflicting mix of compassion and fierce resolve. Gone was the facade of an ordinary nurse. Her posture shifted subtly into that of a trained warrior. "I wasn't here by coincidence," she confessed, her voice firm but gentle. "I'm Marsoc, assigned to Shadow Commander Hart during the corruption investigation." The revelation sent a ripple of shock through Richardson, who turned toward her with wide, disbelieving eyes. Sarah continued, "My job was to protect her if the operation was compromised. You never saw me because you weren't supposed to." Richardson's stomach twisted with the realization that the woman he'd dismissed as irrelevant had been part of HYDRA's shielding apparatus all along, operating on a level far beyond his understanding. Commander Gray activated a holographic display on the wall, projecting encrypted files Megan had recovered before the ambush. Richardson's face drained of color as he scanned the damning images and documents. It was worse than he imagined. The sprawling network of admirals, contractors, and intelligence intermediaries funneling classified SEAL operational intel to foreign powers. Mission schematics, operator rotations, black site coordinates. Names of covert teams that officially did not exist. Billions of dollars exchanged through ghost corporations. The betrayal was systemic and treacherous. Megan had uncovered a rot that stretched through the highest levels of the chain of command. Richardson's breath came short as the full weight of the conspiracy crushed down on him. His role, though peripheral, was no longer defensible. Commander Gray stepped closer, a tablet in hand, its screen glowing with Richardson's personnel profile and a detailed briefing of his interactions with compromised individuals. He held the tablet out like a verdict waiting to be claimed. "You have to choose, Admiral," he said, his voice calm but unforgiving. "Cooperate, or we classify you as hostile." The word settled over the room like a death sentence. Operators subtly shifted their stances, ready for either outcome. Richardson felt the walls closing in, his power evaporating under the scrutiny of the most lethal task force in existence. His chest tightened, his hands trembled. He stared at the tablet, realizing that whichever path he chose, his life as he knew it was already over. 3 months later, the fallout from Megan's investigation detonated across the highest levels of the U.S. military with the force of a controlled explosion. 14 high-ranking officers, admirals, intelligence liaisons, procurement heads now sat before courts-martial facing charges ranging from conspiracy to treason. Journalists speculated, politicians blustered, but no one knew the full truth except those with clearance deep enough to understand what had nearly happened. Defense contracts worth over $4 billion were frozen, terminated, or placed under federal investigation, their executives dragged into hearings they could no longer buy their way out of. The Navy implemented sweeping reforms in oversight protocols, though the public only ever saw the surface of it. In the shadows, Hydra quietly removed compromised assets before they could endanger another operator. Megan watched the world realign, knowing the threat had always been closer than anyone realized. In a secure underground facility with no official address, Megan stood in a dimly lit chamber surrounded by the few individuals cleared to know her true position. The commendation ceremony was private by necessity. HYDRA operatives could never be publicly recognized. Still, as Commander Gray pinned the classified citation onto her uniform, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Seen, acknowledged, valued not for her facade, but for the invisible sacrifices she made in the shadows. Applause echoed softly, muted, but sincere. There were no cameras, no speeches, no medals she could ever wear in public, but the weight of the recognition struck deeper than any parade could have. She bowed her head slightly, not out of humility, but acceptance. Hydra operated in darkness, but tonight, a sliver of light belonged to her. Admiral Richardson's fate was sealed the moment he chose cooperation over defiance. Granted immunity in exchange for testimony, he provided detailed accounts that dismantled the corruption network from the inside. Yet immunity could not save his career, reputation, or dignity. His dishonorable discharge was swift and absolute. Stripped of rank, uniform, and the authority he once wielded like a weapon, he stepped off the naval base for the last time wearing civilian clothes that suddenly felt too heavy. Cameras captured only his back as he disappeared through the gates, a disgraced silhouette swallowed by a gray winter morning. For all his former power, he left with nothing but the memory of the moment he realized the woman he had humiliated could have destroyed him and didn't. The humiliation lingered longer than any punishment the courts could deliver. Sarah's path shifted too, shaped by the chaos and loyalty forged in those hospital walls. She accepted a permanent position within HYDRA's protective detail, her skills and intuition proving invaluable in safeguarding the organization's most classified operatives. Her connection with Megan deepened, not romantic, not superficial, but rooted in mutual respect and the unspoken understanding of shared trauma. They trained together, debriefed together, and learned each other's rhythms in the field, forming an alliance that strengthened Hydra's operational integrity. For the first time since Yemen, Megan allowed someone into her orbit without fear of betrayal. Sarah became not just a protector, but a constant, a quiet presence, reminding Megan that even in the shadows, trust was not impossible. The area inside the Naval Operations Center felt different when Megan stepped through its doors again, this time not in disguise, not under false rank, not hiding who she was. She wore her true insignia, the one no one had known existed, Deputy Commander of Hydra, with clearance that eclipsed every officer in the building. Conversations died mid-sentence as personnel turned toward her, recognition dawning like a slow-rising storm. And then, one by one, the room stood at attention. The respect she had been denied before now filled the space like a tidal wave. Megan walked forward with quiet authority, her presence no longer invisible but undeniable. The hook tightened as she paused at the center of the room, her gaze sweeping across the officers who once overlooked her. This time, no one dared look away. Megan stood once more on the dockside, warehouse platform where her blood had stained the concrete months before, though now the place felt unrecognizable, reborn into something purposeful and alive. The old crates were replaced with reinforced training partitions, ballistic dummies, and silent observation decks where operators monitored simulations. Recruits moved with controlled intensity across the floor, unaware that the woman watching them had nearly died in the same shadows they now used for practice. She inhaled the ocean air, letting the steady rhythm of the waves ease the last remnants of a memory that no longer owned her. The hum of generators and distant shouts created a symphony of discipline rather than danger. What had once been a graveyard of secrets was now the birthplace of future guardians. Megan traced her fingers along a support beam still bearing a faint scorch mark from her firefight, a reminder of how far she had come. This was the legacy she had earned through pain, sacrifice, and truth. Standing there, she felt the weight of the past lift just slightly, not erased, transformed. She moved along the catwalk above the training floor, observing the next group of shadow operatives running a close-quarter scenario with controlled ferocity. Each trainee carried a mix of fear and determination, the universal markers of those who walked the line between myth and oblivion. Megan descended the stairs quietly, her steps deliberate, her posture calm but commanding. The recruits stopped instinctively when they noticed her approach, unsure whether to brace, salute, or breathe. She waved a hand gently, signaling them to relax, and began offering precise corrections with the tone of someone who had survived every mistake she warned them about. She taught them that the world's deadliest warriors are not fueled by ego, but by purpose. That recognition is a hollow currency compared to integrity. That silent sacrifice is a burden carried by the few who understand that history will never record their names and that this anonymity is its own honor. Watching comprehension dawn in their eyes reminded her that leadership is not declared but earned. This, she knew, was where her impact would echo longest. The 97 SEALs who had stormed the hospital with terrifying synchronization had long since returned to their shadowed corners of the globe, continuing missions that would never reach public ears or official records. Some were deep underwater in classified subsurface operations. Others were embedded overseas under false identities, orchestrating quiet victories a world would never credit them for. Yet each one carried the same unspoken truth. Loyalty transcended rank, transcended uniform, transcended protocol. Their bond to Megan had not been born from hierarchy, it had been forged in that moment they chose to protect not just a leader, but but a warrior who had been betrayed by the very institution she served. Messages reached her through encrypted channels at irregular intervals, always brief, always respectful, always reminding her that she would never again walk alone. Their loyalty was her shield, and her survival was their shared vow. Even scattered across continents, they remained her silent phalanx. And Meghan honored that loyalty with every decision she made. Her old flaw, the inability to trust, had once shielded her from vulnerability, but also isolated her from allies who could have carried part of her burden. Now she understood that trust was not blind obedience, but evidence collected through action, consistency, and presence. Richardson had assumed authority guaranteed respect, and that assumption had brought him ruin. Meghan had learned the opposite. Authority meant nothing without integrity. She began opening herself up to her team, allowing them to see not just her strength but the scars that shaped it. She found herself confiding in Sarah during late-night debriefings, speaking truths she once would have buried beneath operational stoicism. Trust no longer felt like a gamble, it felt like a calculated risk worth taking. She realized the armor she once wore had kept danger out, but had also kept everyone else at arm's length. Now she chose connection, not because she needed protection, but because leadership demanded more than resilience, it demanded humanity. Meghan refused to repeat the mistakes that nearly destroyed her. She evolved beyond them. As the sun dipped low over the harbor, casting ribbons of gold across the water, Meghan stood at the center of the training floor, her silhouette framed by the final light of the day. Her team gathered around her, rookies, veterans, silent ghosts who moved like shadows but stood like guardians. She felt no spotlight, no fanfare, no need for recognition. What filled her chest was something deeper than pride. She was no longer the invisible operative forced to hide her rank, nor the wounded officer fighting alone in the dark. She was a commander surrounded by those she trusted, respected, and believed in. The warehouse hummed softly as night settled in, carrying the promise of missions yet to come and legacies still being written. Meghan lifted her chin, letting the twilight wash over her, finding peace in the knowledge that the greatest battles are fought not for glory but for the people who walk beside you into the unknown. And with that truth anchoring her, she stepped forward into the next chapter of her life. If you want to follow more stories like this, make sure to follow the channel.